Welcome back to the deep dive. It's great to have you with us again as we really get into some fascinating material you've shared.
Great to be here.
Today, we're setting off on a bit of an exploration, looking into creativity and, well, where inspiration actually comes from.
That's the plan.
Our main source is this thing called Redefine Imaginify, and honestly, from what I've seen, it gives a really different take, almost a strategic look at how creative thoughts actually get going.
That's exactly right. So for this deep dive, what we really want to do is carefully unpack what Redefine Imaginify is laying out about sparking imagination, about getting those, creative ideas moving.
Yeah, because it feels like we're going beyond just general tips here.
Definitely. We're moving past the usual stuff about like thinking outside the box. This source, it offers a very specific kind of unique framework. And we've also got this supplementary hypothetical source, research, which should help us get a deeper grasp on how really new ideas actually connect, how they resonate.
What really struck me straight away about these sources is that they're not just, giving you a checklist. It feels like they're suggesting something much bigger. A whole system for understanding how different inputs, often really surprising ones, feed into creative work. It really makes you look beyond the obvious places you might think of for inspiration, which frankly feels like a bit of a revelation in itself.
It really is.
Yeah.
Redefine Imaginify is trying to sort of uncover the actual mechanics behind inspiration.
Right.
So if you've ever sat there wondering, how can I consistently find new ideas, or what really sparks creativity in a way that feels like it works and lasts, well, then this deep dive should be right up your alley.
Okay.
We're aiming to follow the path of an idea, from that first little flicker inside all the way to how it makes an impact out in the world, especially thinking about the modern digital world, which is complex.
And this ties into our last discussion, doesn't it? We talked about the internal architect and algorithms.
Exactly. We sort of left off at that big question. How do you create stuff that's genuinely you, your unique vision, but also manages to cut through all the noise online? Beat the algorithms and actually go viral organically.
That's the million-dollar question.
And today, we start tackling that.
Okay, so let's dive in. Looking at Redefine Imaginify, where does it begin, this whole exploration of creative fuel? It seems like environments, places, experiences, they're really important, but maybe not in the way we usually think.
You've nailed a key point right there. What's really interesting is how Redefine Imaginify focuses on places that actively shake up your routine, or places that give you new kinds of sensory input.
So not the comfy studio or the peaceful view.
Not necessarily. It's less about things being conventionally nice or creative looking. The emphasis is really on sort of breaking the pattern of your normal day-to-day life, nudging you out of your usual mental tracks.
Huh. That feels quite different from the usual advice, the stuff about setting up the perfect stimulating desk space. So we're talking about environments that almost deliberately throw you off a bit, or at least disrupt your habits. It sounds counterintuitive, but I'm curious.
Precisely. And Redefine Imaginify actually has a specific term for these kinds of environments. It calls them liminal spaces.
Liminal spaces.
Okay, these are those in-between places, the transitional zones, the places we often just pass through, maybe even find a bit boring or annoying.
Liminal spaces. I like that phrase. It sounds slightly mysterious. Can you give us some concrete examples from the source? Because my mind immediately goes to places where you're just waiting, not exactly inspiration hotspots.
You're thinking along the right lines.
Yeah.
The source points to places like airport departure lounges, waiting rooms,
Yeah.
maybe at the doctor's or dentist. Laundromats are mentioned, bus stops.
Okay, yeah.
Or even that kind of quiet moment just before a train arrives at the platform.
Yeah.
These aren't places we typically think of as, havens for creativity.
No, definitely not. Most of us are probably just trying to kill time there, right? Scrolling on our phones, maybe feeling a bit impatient.
Exactly. We often try to actively tune them out.
So here's the kicker. Why does Redefine Imaginify argue these places are surprisingly powerful for creativity? It feels like it goes against everything we assume.
Well, the argument they make is actually pretty compelling. It's because you don't have your usual routines running, or the familiar things around you that normally anchor your thoughts.
Yeah.
Because of that absence, your mind is basically set free.
Set free. How so?
Your thinking isn't tied down to the usual to-do list, or the habits you have in your office, or even the familiar sights on your commute. It's like the structure your brain normally operates within is temporarily removed.
Okay.
Redefine suggests this creates a kind of, almost like a cognitive white space. Think about your brain's usual pathways. They get worn down by routine, right?
Yeah, like mental grooves.
Exactly. Liminal spaces act like hitting a reset button. They kind of force your brain to make new, temporary connections because the old ones aren't being activated. And that's where unexpected ideas can pop up.
So it's less about the place itself being inspiring and more about it breaking your established mental patterns.
Precisely. It's about deliberately disrupting those patterns to let your brain sort of play around in a different way. These spaces create a kind of vacuum almost, and your imagination naturally tries to fill it.
That actually clicks when you put it like that. It's like the brain, without its usual predictable inputs, starts looking around for new things to connect. Is that the idea?
That's a great way to put it. When we're in a very familiar or structured place, our brain might be on autopilot, just efficiently doing its thing.
Right.
But in these in-between zones, the autopilot switches off. It forces a more active, maybe more spontaneous kind of thinking.
Yeah.
I bet you've had ideas pop into your head waiting for a flight or something similar.
Actually, yeah. I can definitely think of times waiting around when some random thought just appeared. I never really thought about why, though.
Well, Redefine Imagify argues it's not just random chance. It's a direct result of unmooring the mind, deliberately. Think about commuting or waiting for an appointment, even taking a shower.
Yeah, the shower, classic example.
Right. Those are all moments when you're briefly disconnected from your main task and your usual environment. This source gives us a solid theoretical reason why those transitional moments are so fertile for creativity. It reframes what seems like wasted time into potentially prime creative thinking time. It's almost like forced divergent thinking practice.
Okay, so that's one side of the coin. These disruptive, pattern-breaking liminal spaces designed to jolt us out of our mental ruts. But what about the other classic source of inspiration, nature? Does Redefine Imagify talk about that? The calming influence.
It absolutely does, and it connects nature to inspiration using another really interesting concept, effortless attention.
Effortless attention.
This is important. It's not just about being outdoors. It's about a specific way of engaging with the natural world, a very low-effort way.
Effortless attention. That sounds a bit like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Attention usually feels like it takes work, focus. How does the source define this?
Think about the kind of attention you use when you're just watching waves roll onto the beach over and over, or maybe watching clouds drift across the sky, or just listening to leaves rustling in a breeze.
Okay, yeah, I can picture that.
You're observing, you're present, you might notice details, but it doesn't feel like work. It's not strenuous mental effort. It's more of a gentle, kind of wandering focus, a soft fascination, totally different from the focused, effortful attention you need for, say, solving a complex problem or concentrating on a dense report.
Or navigating traffic.
Exactly. With effortless attention, your mind is engaged, but it's not being taxed.
Ah, okay, I see the difference now. It's not like you're actively trying to identify bird calls or count petals on a flower. You're just letting the experience wash over you without a specific goal. So what does Redefine Imagify say are the benefits of that state for creativity?
Well, according to the source, this relaxed state actively and pretty significantly reduces mental fatigue.
Okay, that makes sense. Brain drain is real.
Totally. Our brains are constantly working, using energy, and they get tired from that sustained, directed focus. Engaging in effortless attention is like giving your brain a proper break. It allows the default mode network to kick in.
The default mode network.
Yeah, that's a part of the brain associated with mind-wandering, daydreaming, internal thought. And it's strongly linked to creative problem-solving and making connections. So by reducing that mental fatigue, you're effectively opening up more cognitive space for imagination. It's like decluttering your mental workspace, making room for new ideas to bump into each other without the usual pressure of an overworked mind. The source even calls it a kind of mental palate cleanser.
A mental palate cleanser. I like that. So what we're seeing here from Redefine Imagify are two really distinct types of environmental triggers for creativity, both vital, apparently, but working in almost opposite ways.
That's a perfect summary.
On one side, you've got the deliberate disruption of liminal spaces, forcing your brain to adapt, make new connections, almost shaking it away.
Right, novelty and disruption.
And on the other, you have the relaxed openness and cognitive restoration you get from nature through effortless attention, letting the mind rest, expand, and then synthesize.
Exactly. Both presented as key environmental triggers. One excites the system with newness, the other calms it down so it's more receptive. Different paths to a similar outcome, fostering insight.
So thinking about this practically, for you listening,
Yeah.
what does this really mean for trying to be more creative day to day. It feels like there's this interesting duality: environments that push your brain out of its comfort zone and environments that give it space to breathe and recover.
It definitely suggests a much more nuanced and strategic way to think about your surroundings.
Hmm.
Your physical environment isn't just a backdrop. It's an active tool you can use for creative thinking.
So it's about being intentional, choosing the right environment for the right mental state.
Precisely. It's about managing where and how you spend your time, not just for getting tasks done, but specifically for sparking new ideas. Your surroundings become active partners in the creative process itself.
Okay, that covers the environmental side. Now, shifting gears a bit,
Hmm.
you mentioned Redefine Imaginify also talks a lot about the input we get from other creative works, right? Books, movies, art.
Yes, a huge chunk focuses on that. But again, there's a critical twist. It's not just about passively consuming this stuff. That's a common trap. Thinking just watching or reading more will automatically make you more creative.
Ah, so it's not about quantity, necessarily. No, the source uses this really cool phrase, narrative cross-pollination. It sounds a bit academic, maybe, but the way Redefine Imaginify explains it, it feels very hands-on, very powerful. What does that actually involve?
At its heart, narrative cross-pollination, as Redefined Imaginify describes it, means actively going out and finding stories, visual styles, themes, even just emotional tones from really different unconnected areas,
Different areas?
like different genres.
Yes, but potentially much wider than that. Different disciplines, different historical periods, different cultural contexts. It's about deliberately looking for contrast,
Mhm.
intentionally creating a kind of intellectual friction by exposing yourself to ideas and forms that don't naturally sit together.
So the opposite of sticking to what you know and like?
Hmm.
Exactly. It's the antidote to staying in your filter bubble, or just consuming more of the same within your favorite genre. The aim is to force your brain to try and connect things that seem, at first glance, totally unrelated.
Okay, but why? Why seek out that clash? My first thought might be to dig deeper into one subject to become an expert, not to jump between radically different things. There must be a strong reason behind this productive clash idea in Redefine Imaginify.
There is, and it's absolutely central to their framework. The source argues that by forcing your brain to wrestle with these wildly different forms and ideas, you're actively stimulating new neural pathways. You're building new bridges in your mind.
How does that work?
Your brain loves patterns, right? It loves making connections. When you feed it such diverse, almost clashing inputs, it has to work harder to find or create some kind of link between them. This process deliberately breaks your existing ways of thinking, challenges your assumptions, and helps you form entirely new mental models.
So the effort of trying to reconcile the differences is what generates the new insight.
Precisely. And the Research Novationary source backs this up, suggesting that real breakthroughs often happen right at the intersection where previously separate fields or ideas collide.
Can you give us a really vivid example from Redefine Imaginify of what this kind of cross-pollination might actually look like in practice? Because vastly different can still feel a bit vague.
Okay, so the source gives this specific example. Imagine spending some time really diving deep into, say, dense science fiction. Maybe a complex cyberpunk novel full of, futuristic tech and social commentary.
Right. Got it.
And then immediately after that, you deliberately immerse yourself in Renaissance art,
Hmm.
like really contemplating the symbolism in a Botticelli painting or studying the anatomical detail in a Michelangelo sculpture.
Wow, okay. Sci-fi dystopia to Renaissance beauty? That is a massive leap. My brain feels like it would get whiplash just thinking about it, never mind finding a connection. How does that extreme contrast actually help? Isn't it just confusing?
And that feeling, that sense of whiplash, that tension,
Yeah.
that's exactly where Redefine Imaginify says the magic happens.
Really?
Yes. The source argues these unexpected juxtapositions don't just sit there quietly in your mind next to each other. They actively create a clash, a collision of different creative ideas, and that collision is what becomes productive.
So the friction itself is the engine.
Exactly. Think about it. If you only ever read, say, fantasy novels, your own creative ideas might naturally stay within that realm. But if you then deliberately inject something totally different, maybe the visual language of abstract painting, or the philosophical ideas from ancient Stoicism, or even the strict structures of classical music,
Okay.
you create this incredibly fertile ground for genuinely original concepts to sprout. Your brain, trying to make sense of these dissonant pieces, is forced to operate way outside its usual grooves.
It's not just about appreciating different things, it's about actively using them as ingredients.
Ingredients, that's a perfect word. You're treating these diverse inputs like raw materials. You're consciously mixing and matching them to spark something genuinely new, not just passively taking them in. It's an active, almost like a chemical reaction in your mind.
An alchemical process,
Yeah.
where the friction is the heat that makes the reaction happen. And this friction, this clash, is what Redefine Imaginify says leads to something totally new. Which brings us back to that digital world challenge.
Precisely. And this connects directly to how these unique ideas might actually stand out online. Redefine Imaginify makes this crucial point.
Yeah.
Creativity isn't about magically pulling something out of thin air. That's mostly a myth.
Right.
Instead, it's more like a process of synthesis transformation. But, and this is key, it needs rich, varied inputs to work.
Synthesis transformation.
Yeah. The output of what the source calls the internal architect, that's the part of your mind doing this creative mixing, is inherently a synthesis transformation. It leads to something genuinely novel. And it's this novelty, born from that productive clash of ideas, that has the potential to really challenge how algorithms work and cut through the noise.
Okay, that's a huge idea. So if algorithms are basically pattern matching machines, looking for what fits existing trends based on past data, how does this totally new stuff, the output from the internal architect, actually get around them? It seems like it would be invisible to them at first.
It absolutely can be initially. Algorithms fundamentally look backwards. They predict future engagement based on past success. They optimize by recognizing patterns.
Okay.
But the internal architect, fueled by narrative cross-pollination, thrives on creating new patterns, new pathways, precisely by forcing your brain to deal with these really different forms and ideas.
So the most creative stuff might actually fail the algorithm test at first.
It's quite possible. The most impactful, maybe even the most viral ideas in the long run could be the ones that initially confuse the algorithms because they don't neatly fit into any existing box. They are those unexpected juxtapositions that Redefine Imaginify values so highly. And the Research Novationary source really digs into this. It argues that truly novel content, yeah, it might struggle to find its audience initially because the algorithms don't know where to place it, but once it does connect with people, it often has a deeper stickiness and shareability, precisely because it's unique. It surpasses the more generic algorithm-optimized stuff.
So if your creation is genuinely different, algorithms might ignore it, but humans recognize the novelty, and that's what gives it organic traction.
That seems to be the argument. When you deliberately mix, the dense sci-fi and Renaissance art, the thing you create has an inherent uniqueness baked into it. That strangeness, that unexpected blend, can be its own hook.
So it draws attention because it's different, not because it's similar to what's already popular.
Exactly. The creations coming from this internal architect process, born from that carefully curated environment and curated input, they tend to have a distinct voice. And that distinctiveness helps them stand out from the flood of generic content that's often designed just to please the algorithm.
Okay, so it aligns with the Redefine Imaginify, focus on active engagement, taking passive consumption and turning it into raw material for something truly original.
Precisely. And Research Novationaries apparently has case studies showing creations that flew completely under the algorithmic radar at first, but then exploded through sheer word of mouth because people were struck by their originality.
Wow. This honestly changes how you might think about, well, everything you consume. Watching a movie, reading an article, it's not just passive entertainment anymore.
It doesn't have to be.
It can be part of your active creative process, turning leisure into intentional fieldwork for ideas.
That's a great way to see it. Every piece of content becomes a potential ingredient for your unique creative mix.
Like building a pantry for your brain.
Absolutely. The sources are essentially guiding you to become a proactive curator of your own mind's inputs. Every book, film, artwork, conversation. You start seeing it not just for what it is, but for what it could become when combined with something else inside your internal architect.
So you're building this vast mental library of diverse bits and pieces ready to be mixed up in new ways.
Exactly. And the Research Novationaries material suggests audiences are getting tired of the predictable stuff anyway. There's a growing hunger for genuine novelty, which is exactly what this Redefine Imaginify process helps you create.
A curator for your brain. I love that image. And it connects back to being mindful of your environment too, right? Knowing whether you need the disruption of a liminal space or the calm of nature, and then combining that with being this deliberate curator of inputs. It's not just a list of tricks, it's a whole system.
It really is. It's about consciously designing your entire creative ecosystem, both your physical space and your intellectual space, to encourage that crucial synthesis to happen.
So it's more than just random tips. Redefine Imagify seems to be mapping out a systematic, almost scientific way to cultivate creativity.
That's the core idea. It suggests creativity isn't just some mysterious gift you either have or don't. It's a process you can understand, nurture, and even strategically optimize through deliberate choices about your inputs and your environment.
Okay, so putting it all together.
Yes, if we synthesize what Redefine Imagify is laying out, it's definitely a holistic framework. It really meshes together the strategic use of environments, the disruptive liminal spaces, the restorative power of nature, with that intentional active hunting for diverse inputs through narrative cross-pollination.
So it's not one or the other. You can't just read weird books and expect results if you're stuck in a draining environment, or vice versa.
Exactly. The magic, according to Redefine Imagify, happens in the combination. The curated environment working together with the curated input. That's where the creative spark is most likely to catch fire. It's about building a system for inspiration, not just hoping for lightning to strike.
A system. Okay. It suggests creativity is less about waiting for genius and more about maybe disciplined practice and knowing how to manage your environment and inputs.
I think that's a fair interpretation. It's about becoming a conscious architect of your own inspiration.
So, for you listening right now, what does this Redefine Imagify framework actually suggest you could do differently? How can you apply this to your own creative efforts, whether it's, for your job or a passion project or even just solving everyday problems? How do we make this practical?
Well, the big shift is towards being deliberate, proactive, not waiting for inspiration, but actively setting the stage for it. It turns things you might normally ignore into potential tools.
Okay, so give us some starting points. If someone wants to try being this architect of inspiration, what are some first steps they could take based on these sources?
Okay, first step. Actively seek out those liminal spaces. Intentionally use them. Next time you find yourself in a waiting room or an airport lounge or even just stuck in traffic, resist the urge to just zone out with your phone.
Put the phone away. That's tough.
It is, but try it. Put it away. Let your mind drift. Look around. Notice the weird details, the snippets of conversation, the light. Use that in-between time consciously. Let your brain break free from its usual tracks and see what thoughts bubble up.
So turn downtime into active mind-wandering time.
Exactly. Even just taking a walk through an unfamiliar part of town can serve that purpose. It's about disrupting the familiar to allow the novel.
Okay, I like that. Turning boring waits into creative potential. What about the nature side, the effortless attention?
Be intentional about carving out time for that too. Find moments for effortless attention in natural settings. It doesn't have to be a massive hike in the wilderness.
Right.
Even just sitting by a window watching rainfall or observing the leaves on a tree in a park during your lunch break or listening to birdsong. The key is that effortless part, just allowing your mind to gently observe and rest without trying to achieve anything specific.
So let the brain recharge and declutter.
Think of it as mental recovery time, creating that spaciousness for ideas to connect later.
And then the input side, the narrative cross-pollination. How do we actively do that?
This requires conscious effort. Deliberately diversify your mental diet. Go way beyond your usual comfort zone. If you love thrillers, maybe pick up a collection of surrealist poetry or read a biography of a scientist from a completely different era. If you only watch comedies, maybe watch a complex foreign drama or a documentary about deep-sea life.
Find the clash.
Yes. Remember the sci-fi and Renaissance art example? Seek out those unexpected pairings. Actively look for the friction between different styles, ideas, and eras. The goal isn't just to know more things, it's to feed your internal architect contrasting ingredients to stimulate those new connections.
Okay. And what's the big picture mindset shift here, the overall way we should approach things?
It's about reframing how you see everything you engage with. Every piece of content isn't just for enjoyment or information anymore. It's potential raw material.
Raw material.
For your own unique synthesis. See every film, book, conversation, artwork, even just things you overhear or observe. See it all as a potential building block for your next creative idea. You become an active forager, constantly gathering inputs that your internal architect can recombine in surprising ways.
So your whole life becomes a source of potential inspiration if you approach it right.
That's the idea, a continuous wellspring.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping up this part of our depth dive, exploring redefine, imaginify, and research innovation areas has definitely given us a really specific, almost tactical view of inspiration. It's clearly not just random luck.
Not at all. It's suggesting inspiration can be systematically encouraged,
Yeah.
sparked by certain kinds of environments, those disruptive liminal spaces, or the restorative natural settings that allow effortless attention.
Right.
And, just as importantly, it's fueled by that active narrative cross-pollination. Using diverse creative works intentionally to create those productive clashes, those collisions of ideas that lead to something genuinely new, something that might even have a unique edge in our algorithm-driven world.
Yeah. And this whole framework, the way it's presented in your sources, it leaves us and you, the listener, with a really fascinating question to chew on, doesn't it?
I think it does. If creativity is so heavily shaped by these specific external things, the places that disrupt us, the nature that restores us, the deliberate mixing of clashing inputs, does that mean creativity is mostly just about getting good at finding and setting up the right external triggers, like optimizing your surroundings and your media diet?
Or is the really deep work actually internal? Is it more about building up our own capacity, that internal architect, to actively find those inputs, choose the right ones, and then skillfully synthesize them within ourselves, making original meaning out of all that external stuff?
Where does the balance lie? Is it more about controlling the outside world or cultivating the inner world? Or maybe the real skill is navigating the interplay between the two?
That's the question we want to leave you with. Something to keep this deep dive going in your own thinking. We really hope this has given you a lot to consider and maybe some fresh angles on how you can find and spark your own imagination.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring.